Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's so great to be with you tonight. I'm Michelle Marks. I'm the Chancellor of the University of Colorado, Denver. It's great to see everyone here tonight. I'm honored to welcome you to the University of Colorado, Denver. And we are proud to partner tonight with the Denver Foundation, the Open Media Foundation, and CBS Colorado to present the City of Denver's second mayoral runoff forum. This features, as you all well know, the two top candidates from the April 4th city election, Kelly Brough, and who is a CU Denver alum, I might say, and yes, and Mike Johnston. I want to also acknowledge that we have two University of Colorado regents with us tonight, Alana Spiegel and Norbert Chavez. Thank you so much for being here with us. CU Denver has educated students for more than 100 years. And 50 years ago to this year, in 1973, we became a standalone campus right here in the heart of Denver. And as I look back and reflect, as I've done many times this year, our growth and progress as Colorado's only urban public research university has been inextricably linked with Denver's own growth and progress. We've educated more than 110,000 graduates to help shape and lead the city, many of whom are still here working and leading the city, including Denver's current mayor over the last 12 years, Michael B. Hancock, who earned a master's degree from CU Denver in 1995. The efforts of our faculty and our students and our staff have a huge influence on Denver and will do so going forward. And that is by providing career-connected programs that fuel Denver's workforce, conducting innovative research, and forging partnerships to address urban challenges that have been talked about in many of these forums, like housing and health and sustainability. And our work makes CU Denver the perfect convener for an event like this. And there are a lot of important questions that we want to hear from our candidates on. And these questions are so fundamental to our future. We're going to hear 4 questions tonight from CU Denver students who are going to lead us into that future. And some of those students represent our School of Public Affairs. Our School of Public Affairs is home to a new Center of Policy and Democracy. I'm looking for Paul Teskey, the dean of this school, who you'll see later tonight. And that new Center of Policy and Democracy helps us understand how policies and how politics affect major issues that we're facing in today's and tomorrow's society. Denver's future relies significantly on higher education, and we're fortunate to share the Auraria Higher Education campus with Metropolitan State University and also with the Community College of Denver. Together, the three of us make up Denver's education and workforce talent pipeline. And our 3 institutions have a combined 40,000 students and 5,000 faculty and staff, plus over 200,000 alumni with an economic impact of $1.8 billion. And that is huge for Denver's future. And I want to recognize Colleen Walker, who's here with us, CEO. She's the CEO of AHEC, and thank you for your partnership. And also I want to recognize Marie DeSanctis, who is the president of the Community College of Denver, and also Janine Davidson, who's the president of MSU, who could not be with us tonight. Higher education are the places where big ideas begin and where they're debated and tested, and they help us chart our path forward. And we're going to see some of these principles as discussed on this stage tonight. Thank you, everybody, for attending the event tonight. And I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, the Denver Foundation's president and CEO, Javier Soto.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chancellor Marks, and thank you for welcoming us here to CU Denver. And thank you to everyone here tonight for joining us. Welcome again to the Runoff Mayoral Policy Forum. We're so proud to partner with CU Denver School of Public Affairs and with CBS Colorado to present this important conversation. We're honored that you're here with us tonight. And, you know, perhaps like many people that I talk to in Denver about this race, you feel that Denver is at an important inflection point. Folks that I talk to talk about how important this decision on who the next mayor will be in relation to that inflection point and what it will mean in the next 10 and 20 years. The race thus far has been monumental. It's been full of very different ideas, and it's been a bit crowded, less so tonight. Today we're down to 2 outstanding candidates who have dedicated the bulk of their careers to serving this community and this state. Tonight, they will make the case on why they deserve your vote to lead the city through this period of inflection and beyond. As you may have noticed, we invited you here tonight to a policy forum, not to a debate. This was intentional. We aim for a civil discourse about the important issues at stake in this election and to hear thoughtful answers to policy questions and proposed solutions for the challenges we face here in Denver. We solicited questions from nonprofit partners we work with on topics that they and we consider to be the most pressing issues that will be in the next mayor's inbox. And we will hear from CU Denver students as well, future leaders and perhaps future mayors of Denver. Working in partnership in this way helps us to learn together and to tackle important issues together. So now I'd like to turn it over to our partners from CBS Colorado, who will moderate tonight's policy forum. Please join me in welcoming Shaun Boyd and Michelle Griego.
I also just want to start out by saying thank you to the University of Colorado Denver for hosting our event, to the Denver Foundation for bringing us all together, and to our candidates. Kelly, Mike, thanks for being here as well. We're excited to have you, and we're excited to have such a big crowd with us today, and those who are also listening live as we live stream this too.
So we have a few housekeeping items,
Yes.
right? Yes, both candidates take very similar positions on many of the key issues. So tonight we hope to ask questions that will get to the nuance of their policy positions. We're going to be asking questions on topics we haven't discussed much to date. And we solicited questions, as Javier mentioned, from nonprofit partners throughout the community. We will ask the same questions of both candidates so we can show what differentiates these two. And at the end of the forum this evening, we will hear from a few student leaders from CU Denver, so questions coming directly from the students. The format is as follows. We will give each candidate 30 seconds for opening remarks. We have a countdown clock right here. The order was determined by a coin toss. Do we know who won that coin
Mike,
toss?
I think.
Mike won the coin toss. There you go. You were not present for the coin toss, but you won. We have about 60 minutes for questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their answers. The time will count down on the screen right here in front of you. And this is a forum. It's not a debate, so the candidates will not present rebuttals. However, as we are the moderators this evening, we will reserve the right for follow-up questions, and we do have a few. We will allow the candidates to deliver closing remarks before we end the night.
Before we get started, one quick request. This is a nonpartisan event, so we ask for no interruptions, applause, booing, anything like that. Just hold it all until after closing remarks. Good? Got that.
All right.
Ready for opening remarks. Mike, you got 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Let's start.
Well, hello, you all. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for taking the time to join. Really excited about the chance to have an in-depth policy conversation tonight. I've had the chance to do that here at the school in the past with Dean Teskey, and great to be back again. I think we are at, as you all said, a real inflection point where we have a chance to think about what is the future of this city going to look like, and how do we make sure we have a vision that is big enough to make sure we can deliver a Denver that is vibrant and that is affordable and that is safe for every neighborhood in the city. And that's what I'm excited to talk about tonight, and thank you so much for having me here.
Okay, Kelly.
Yeah, totally. We're back to the 30-second. Well, first let me say, to CU Denver, when I got my MBA, who knew what I'd do with it? I spent most of my career being an executive, though, and never running for office. It feels good to be at this stage. Probably the most relevant thing I have done with that MBA that is relevant to this position is I was John Hickenlooper's chief of staff when he was mayor, meaning I was responsible for day-to-day operations. And I would love the chance to go back and work with the city team again and deliver the kind of results and restore the promise of Denver for all our residents. I look forward to tonight's conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So we have questions on a range of topics, from climate to education. You each have 2 minutes to respond to each question. We're going to start, though, before we get to the policy questions, since we are hosting this event at the University of Colorado Denver, and we have, I think, some college students in attendance with us today, I want you to share a little bit about your own college experiences and your hopes for our college students. Kelly?
Yeah, so my undergraduate is from Montana State. Going to college was a challenge for me. I had to figure out how to pay for it myself, like many kids probably today are facing, meaning I worked nights and weekends to get myself through college and my undergrad. I did it by working in the school a lot of work study. Probably the most memorable things for me were I served food in the cafeteria every single meal. And then I worked in the photography office where I actually was supposed to cut the slides. Don't tell them, but I think I screwed up on some of the students' art projects, and I feel so bad because I was really not very well trained for it. That said, every single minute of my college experience was working. And then I came to Denver. I got in-state status 1 year so I could go back to college and get my MBA, but I couldn't afford to do it without getting in-state status. And I worked full-time as a counselor with young women who had been adjudicated in our criminal justice system while I got my MBA. And my goal was to be able to work on the business side of that nonprofit and support the young women in the work. It ended up, I went to work for the city of Denver with that MBA. What I would say to young people today is that path was hard then. I think it's harder now. And it's why, for me, when I think about the young people and the barriers to being able to get an education, I know paying for it is a key barrier for so many of our kids who deserve this opportunity. And it really drove me when I was at the chamber to lead the work to pass the Denver Prosperity Fund. So every Denver public school graduate would have the opportunity to go to school and remove the barrier of being able to pay for it, because I also know an education changes lives, and it changed mine.
Thank you. Mike?
Thanks so much, and thank you all for being here. Yeah, for me, my college experience was very formative, too. I had the opportunity to go to Yale for college, and I chose that university because it was in the middle of a very struggling city that had real challenges. And so I spent most of my college years working in a public housing project behind my dorm, which is called Church Street South. And I spent that time mentoring teenage boys who, after school, I would come and do after school and supports and tried to help them in all the ways we could get their lives together and on path. And I realized the most powerful forces in my life were teachers, and I thought the most powerful impact I could make on the next generation of young people was being a teacher. So that was what inspired me to start my career as a teacher. My first job was in Greenville, Mississippi, in what was then one of the poorest counties in America, and loved my work there. But the more work I did there and the more I came home, the more I realized we had some of those very real disparities here. As you all know, with the Colorado paradox, even 20 years ago, the city that had and the state that had one of the worst disparities for how our own kids do in getting to and through college was not Mississippi, and it was not Alabama, it was not Tennessee. It's actually the state of Colorado. If you are a black or brown kid born in the state of Colorado, your chances of getting to and through college are as hard here as any place. And so that was what inspired me to become a school principal here, and I ran a school up in Thornton, which was, I think we were very proud of for the fact that we succeeded at getting 100% of our seniors to graduate, and 100% of those seniors admitted to four-year colleges, only to find then that many of those kids could not actually go to college in Colorado because they were undocumented. And so my first real effort into politics came around trying to fight to get my students access to the same in-state tuition that the rest of the students in Colorado had, so the doors of college were open. One of my proudest moments probably was standing with the governor over at the Auraria campus the day that bill was signed, and the day thousands of kids in Colorado for the first time could see the doors of opportunity being open for them. And so I think now what we know is we have to make sure that opportunity stays affordable and stays accessible for kids all across Denver, because we know right now we are not doing our job at delivering that promise to every neighborhood.
I remember that day, too. I was there with you. Michelle?
All right, so we are going to switch over now to climate and environment. So this next question comes from Black Parents United Foundation. The nation looks to Colorado for solutions to addressing the climate crisis. So how would you address diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to the sustainability of our community's health and environment? And we'll start with you, Kelly.
Yeah, this is critical. Let me first start by saying I can see why people look to Colorado. We have some extremely aggressive goals around climate with 2040, 100% reduction, carbon reduction by 2040. I don't think we're on track to make them today. I think we have to be a little more intentional about achieving those goals. But I strongly support something that President Biden has done, which is Justice 40. That's 40% of the money that we get from, whether it's Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Jobs Act, to address these climate issues, goes to those communities who've been most historically negatively impacted. In Denver, we have a goal of just as 50, which 50% of the funding, and I strongly support at least 50% of the funding. And I think this means communities like Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, those communities that we know have suffered the greatest impact in our history, allowing us to go directly into that community and identify with them what are the smartest things we can do. Everything from where we place solar panels on our public buildings, where we have the opportunity to put electrification, but also electrifying their homes so that we can save them money in their utility bills more quickly and improve the cleanliness. But you can't ignore Suncor as a contributor to some of the climate issues we face. And these are the issues that we're going to have to deal with as a region and a state. And exactly that's what I would do as mayor, is start working to address. We know the fines for Suncor today are not correcting the behaviors that we have seen historically. I saw the governor has said we have to stop providing the waivers. I think we probably have to take significantly further steps to start to address the challenges that it's presenting in that community. The second major contributor in our region is driving, our behavior, and I think this is where we could, by community, and start in those communities who've been most negatively impacted, identify the investments we can make that give people meaningful alternatives to driving their cars.
Allie,
1 second left. I just got to say, the timer thing is working.
It is. It's great.
It's the flashing red that really helps.
I know,
Yeah.
it helps.
It makes it quite clear.
Okay,
Great, thank you. I think one truth to face for us today is when you think about Denver, you think about the brand of Denver as being a city that is connected to the natural environment. You think about whether you like to bike or hike or ski or climb or just sit on a patio and drink beer and watch the mountains. All of those count as outdoor activities. But you think about that as a real part of Denver's identity. And then you think about the fact that this is also still a city where on a given summer day, you have to be careful whether you can take your daughter or your mom out for a hike because the air quality could be so bad on that day, it's actually dangerous for you to be outside. It's not sustainable for us to have a city that is so both connected to the environment and putting our own people at risk by the damage we're doing to that same environment. And I think I'm glad that you raised this as an equity issue, because it really is not just how do we be aggressive on climate, but how do we be thoughtful about climate as a tool for social equity. And for me, that involves a couple of things. One is, yes, we have to be far more aggressive about both greening our economy and greening our city. And that means electrifying commercial buildings. It means electrifying residential buildings. It means providing incentives for more and more electric vehicles. I was proud to be the one that sponsored the legislation to provide the tax incentive for electric vehicles here in Colorado more than 10 years ago. But it also means being mindful about how we create equal access to that energy and equal benefit from that energy. So that means, yes, holding people accountable that are polluting in our lowest income neighborhoods and have been doing that historically, and making sure those folks are held to account and either pay or get shut down. It also means making sure that we actually use energy as an equalizing tool. And that's why one of the things I would do is look at solar gardens that we can put around the city, but specifically put in those neighborhoods that are struggling the most to pay the utility bills right now. Which means you can both put more green energy onto the grid, you can buy down the cost of utilities, and you can directly subsidize the cost of those utilities for the families that don't have the capacity to put solar panels on their roof right now, but who are being hurt both by the cost of energy and by the impact of dirty air. And so I think we have a way to both serve the city and serve an equitable mission in the city at the same time.
Right. Our next question is from Denver Streets Partnership. Denver has a reputation for being car dependent. Kelly, you touched on this, but that unhealthy dependency conflicts with the city and state's goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve air quality, and eliminate traffic fatalities. What will you do as mayor to reduce Denver's dependency on cars? Mike?
Thank you. I think one is we want to focus on those cars that we do use being electric, and that means not only our own cars and being able to provide incentives for residents to use them, it also means other cars that are in our fleet. It means electrifying all of our fleet vehicles here in the city and county of Denver. It means focusing on electrifying the fleet vehicles of other providers in our city, of UPS and FedEx and Amazon, to incentivize them to make sure they have fleet vehicles. It means things like rental car companies at the airport, to incentivize and push them to make sure they're providing more and more electric vehicles. So the vehicles that are out on the streets are cleaner. And then it means making it easier for people to be able to use public transit. That means more reliability, more frequency, more convenience, and sometimes more affordability. I think one of the things we find is a lot of families, if you're a family of 5, you probably don't take the A line to go to the airport, because if you're paying $50 for that, you're going to be better off paying for parking or paying for an Uber. We want to get the incentives right. I've proposed making it free, working with businesses to subsidize making it free for commuters to take public transit to downtown. That both makes it easier to have less congestion on the streets. It also means if you're working as a barista or as a server downtown, you don't have to worry about spending an hour or 2 hours of your wage to just pay for your parking. And so I think those kind of incentives are going to be critical to make sure we both make it easier for people to ride public transit and make it more accessible. Right now, what we know is that many people will not take public transit because either they don't feel safe, or it's not reliable enough, or it doesn't get them to where they need to go and they don't have a place to connect at the last mile. I've been a strong supporter of greenhouse gas emissions reductions over the last 10 years in my career. I've been a strong supporter of electrifying the grid, and I think that's what I've done historically. That's what I would do again going forward.
Kelly?
Okay, 2 minutes. There's a lot here. You know, the bummer of running for office is sometimes you have to relay the bad news and tell the truth. Here's the truth. We're one of the worst single car occupancy vehicle cities in the nation today. We're all driving by ourselves, and it's Denver, Colorado. And I think this is one of the things we have to come to terms with is what's that about, and really start to address it. So here's a few things that I think we could start to address this issue. I agree, electrification. I was surprised to see the city hasn't fully electrified all of its fleets. It started when I was in the Hickenlooper administration. There's no question we have federal dollars that can help us do it, but I'd partner with DPS and RTD. So we're really taking those public fleets that we know really contribute to air quality challenges, and we get them done together. I'm a cyclist. I've commuted on my bike for 30 years. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask everybody to ride their bike. I am going to ask security to ride with me as mayor. Come on, that was kind of funny. That said, what's really clear to me is we have to kind of address this issue, I think, neighborhood by neighborhood. Today, we have a Vision Zero in our city that says, when you and I drive our car, we kill 0 pedestrians and 0 cyclists. I think this is a good goal. But we're doing a bad job. We're heading in the wrong directions. Other cities are getting it right. I don't think people get out of their cars unless they feel safe. And I think we've got to figure out, are we making the right investments that are really helping people feel safe as they walk to that bus, walk to that train, or get on their bike? And I'd do a reset to double check and make sure we're getting that right, focused on the highest, worst intersections we have in our city and starting to solve those. And then neighborhood by neighborhood, I'd create conversations of what does it take to get out of your car? And if you're close to a light rail station, it's way easier. When you're not, I think we have to start to come up with strategies like electric circulators that move around so that you can easily get on them and get to the train or the bus.
Michelle?
Okay, so we have a question from the Colorado Health Institute, which manages the Colorado's Health and Climate Policy Coalition. So downtown Denver continues to suffer economically from the pandemic. How would you revitalize downtown while limiting greenhouse gas emissions? I know both of you sort of touched on this, but if you can just go further. Kelly, we'll start with you.
Yeah, we have serious work to do downtown. In 2009, when I left being chief of staff for John Hickenlooper, I went to be president and CEO of the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce. For those who were paying attention, in 2009, it was the Great Recession. And it was a challenging time for business and to figure out how we were going to rebuild jobs. My primary job there was to attract and grow local companies and jobs in Colorado. And we were pretty successful through the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation. I would do some of the same things I did then, really focusing on industry by industry, where are our opportunities and how can we grow jobs. I'd stop the STEM. We've lost about 1,000 businesses downtown already. We have 5 office buildings that are being handed back to their lenders because they can't make their payments. It really is a crisis. And not everybody's going to require their workers to all come back in, so the strategy has to be retain what we have and start to grow jobs and investment. I also think we need to relook at, because this is connecting to that question of how don't you make it a negative impact on greenhouse gases, is how you get an eco-pass today. And I'll give you this example. When 90% of the businesses I represented at the chamber were small businesses. In RTD, often when you would negotiate for an eco-pass, a larger company could negotiate a lower price. We need to have a very low price for every employer. Everybody buys in because it's so inexpensive to buy it for your entire workforce, and we start to have everybody at least remove the barrier of buying the ticket, getting on the train or the bus, and increasing the likelihood you might use it. I think that's one strategy. But I also think we need to build even stronger downtown, and I think the opportunity will present that this becomes more of a neighborhood where we have more people living here. There are buildings. Republic Plaza today is looking at potentially transitioning to residential. 1600 Glenarm did it back in the day. This is an opportunity as well, and I would help facilitate that transition of residential downtown.
Kelly, thank you. Mike?
Thank you so much. So I had the opportunity to be the CEO of a downtown company at Union Station the last 3 years, so we've lived through these last 3 years directly, and we know exactly what the risks are. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I found when I talked to my own employees or to other businesses who were either wanting to move downtown or who were worried about leaving downtown was they would say, I'm just not sure I feel safe walking to and from my car in downtown. I'm not sure that my employees can afford to live in Denver if we were to move our business here or to keep it here. And those are the most dramatic issues that we hear. And they're not sure how they can support the population of folks who are unhoused in downtown. It used to be 5 or 10 years ago when you talked to business leaders, the questions were about what are your tax structure, or what are the incentives you can provide to bring businesses here or to keep them here. That's not the conversation now. The conversation now is really, we love Denver. We're worried that we can't afford to have our employees live here, or we're worried that they wouldn't feel safe if they came downtown to work. So I think job one for us is getting back a real sense of safety and security in downtown. That means a couple things I'm sure we'll talk about more. It means making sure we can get folks who are unhoused access to safe, dignified, and stable housing, and to do it quickly. That's why I've proposed building micro-communities around the city where we can take half-acre lots and put tiny homes where people get access to the services they need to get back up on their feet. It also means having increasing our presence of first responders. It means making sure we have both officers, we have mental health workers, we have EMTs and paramedics, so that you have the right first responder responding to the right problem. So if someone is in a mental health crisis, you don't send an officer. You actually would send a mental health worker, because an officer is likely to make that situation worse, not better. But by being able to reestablish that sense of presence, a lot of people don't feel like they have a relationship where they can walk home from a Nuggets game or walk to the parking lot because there's not any law enforcement or presence visible. We want to reestablish that basis of real community-based policing where people are out walking beats, talking to neighbors, talking to business owners, and having people know this is a place where they can work, they can play, they can visit. I don't think it feels that way right now.
Thank you. So in the past few years, Denver has made national headlines for its policies and programs to combat climate change, as Michelle mentioned. The people voted for the Climate Protection Fund sales tax and Waste No More in 2022. City Council approved the Energize Denver Building Performance Policy and Pay As You Throw. There are also the e-bike rebates and the millions of dollars that the city is providing to electrify buildings and homes. So we have two questions here. And if you've already answered these, which you have answered some of them, and you want to do a shorter answer, that's fine too. Do you plan to...
Gentle encouragement.
Do you plan... We have a lot of questions. Do you plan to continue these policies, or do you envision changes? What will be your signature climate policies and programs? I'm going to throw a third one in there. How do you make sure your environmental policies don't increase expenses for people who are already struggling economically? Not sure who started last. Did you, Mike? Is it Kelly's turn first?
I don't know.
Kelly started.
Oh,
first
okay.
last.
Mike.
Okay. Great. So yes, I would keep and implement the policies that have been passed. I think the Climate Office offers a tremendous opportunity to use resources to be able to drive far more aggressive outcomes on climate. I also think there's more that we can do, which I think the idea behind the Climate Office was not that you would have one silo of city government that would focus on how you made a greener Denver. It would actually be that you integrated that into all parts of what the city does. And so what I would be looking for is a leader of the Climate Office who is actually directly connected and directly in partnership with all the rest of the offices in the city. So we're thinking about how everything we do from the airport, how could we try to make DIA, the first airport in the world to not have to rely on fossil fuels, right? How do we be able to set big, ambitious goals that could drive us towards being a leader on climate? And so I think that is what I would do, both in terms of preserving what we have, but really looking to integrate our functions across all of city government. And I do just want to come back to you. I think that part of the way we do this is to really use climate as a focus on equity. So you're using climate to reduce people's costs, not to increase people's costs. And this is where the electrification of buildings is a good example. Many folks have not loved paying their utility bills the last couple of years. So when you see the great variation in gas prices, that's driven a lot of the increases in those costs. The ability to both move our utilities to electric and to do that to stabilize costs over time for families and for businesses, and to do it by prioritizing building that renewable energy in communities that have longest paid the highest prices. When I had my community office up in North Park Hill for 10 years, our utility bills every month were more than our rent. And so if you have old buildings that don't have energy efficiency, what you want to do is provide incentives for them to be able to put in new furnaces, put in double pane windows, do the energy efficiency improvements that we could help finance that we know drop the cost for consumers and increase or reduce the impacts of greenhouse gases on the climate.
Thank you. Kelly?
I really appreciate this question, and maybe the reason it resonates so strongly is my family lived on a tight budget when I was a kid, and we received assistance from government as well. And so I'm going to take your question to kind of the trash fee, right? The reason Denver started to charge a trash fee is because we're not great recyclers compared to other cities in the nation. And we're trying to motivate the behavior we need. But what we know is we have a number of families in our city who they can't afford that fee. So it produces about $27 million in our general fund, that fee that we now pay. That's the estimate. And we've created a program in Denver where we can allocate that money back for families who can't afford to pay. And I think we'll be assessing what that looks like. To me, that's exactly the example of what we have to be very sensitive to as we try to address these issues of when the house costs more because of how we're building it. And while it does have a return on that investment, we have to be able to say the electrification of this building did cost on the front end, and it will take time for an ROI. And I think this is where maybe the city can play a more significant role of helping providing that funding or securing it in front end. That said, there's also tremendous opportunity today. The Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Jobs Act, if you've looked at these dollars, this is like New Deal kind of money. It's big money. I think we could be working harder as a region to bring those dollars home and help make sure our residents aren't bearing on the front end the cost of some of the transition and the goals we want to achieve, and instead making sure we're bringing our federal dollars here to help us do that, and I would really prioritize that.
Thank you. We're going to switch subjects now to education. This next question is from Ednium. The city's historical economic development strategies focus more on attracting talent to the state rather than retaining and cultivating homegrown talent, what we call the Colorado paradox. As mayor, how do you plan to implement a homegrown talent development and retention plan?
I think I go first.
Yep.
This has been an issue for so long, and the economic development strategies actually don't focus on attracting the talent. It is the quality of life here that attracts that talent. But our economy is completely dependent on it. Today, about 3 out of 4 of our jobs require a post-secondary education to get those jobs, and these are good jobs. The problem is we're not producing our own talent to be able to get those jobs and take them. And this is where I think we need a mayor who's willing to step in and really look at, I'll just talk about Denver Public Schools. I think we have to do this throughout our region. But in Denver Public Schools today, 1 in 4 of our kids of color or low-income kids are reading at grade level. Now, why should you care about that is I'm dyslexic. I was taught to read by my teacher in 3rd grade. She saved my life, because if you know anything about our educational system, at 9 years old, if you're not reading at grade level, you're most likely not going to graduate, and it's predicted you'll probably go to prison. And today, with the kind of numbers we have in Denver Public Schools, I think we need a mayor that's willing to use her political capital to say, I'm going to make sure we have a governing body that not only educates our kids and delivers the education they deserve, but also keeps them safe. And then can turn to how we support that education and ensure our kids are coming out the other side with real opportunity. And the primary thing I would do is focus on, Denver has about 10% of our jobs in the city today. There's about 13,000 employees on all the funds, all in, about 10% vacancies. I think we could start looking at transitioning those to paid apprenticeships, paid internships. We know this model works around the world. Arupe High School is a beautiful example locally. And I would start to look at how our kids could connect to working opportunities, earning and learning while they're in high school. We get them to completion, and we help them get to that post-secondary opportunity so they can get the good job.
Thank you. Mike?
I think there are 2 parts of this. One is how do we address inequality when it starts in the K-12 system, and then how do we be much more aggressive about filling those gaps when it comes to the workforce training side. And so the first front, been a teacher, I've been a school principal. I ran 3 high schools around the metro area here in the city and county of Denver, and had the chance to look at what is working to get kids into jobs and what is the big gaps. And what we find is one of the biggest gaps that's growing right now for our kids is actually not just the education they get from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., It's all of the educational opportunities that happen outside of school. It's what happens in the evenings and summer, on the weekends, and those are only available to families who can pay for them, which means those gaps are getting bigger and bigger. And so I helped launch a program that provided after-school programming to students who receive free and reduced lunch so they can get tutoring in math or science. They can go to the science camp at the Science Museum over the summer. They can be a part of a competitive robotics team if that's what they choose to do. So we want to help close those gaps both of passion and of skills to make young people more ready to be able to enter college or the workforce if they want to. The second is we know we have a big challenge, which is a lot of the young people or people who are looking for jobs have the risk of being in a job that they're not sure they want to leave to go into a training program that might cost them a lot of money, have them pick up debt, and then still not get a job that pays them a living wage. And so we proposed growing a program that would offer workforce training. You could choose a university, you could choose a training program where you could enter without having to pay up front the cost of that training. And we ensure that on the back end, you'd actually get placed in a job that pays you $40,000 a year or more. And if you don't get placed in a job that actually makes you a livable wage, then you don't have to pay any of that training cost back. If you do, we share the cost between the employer, between the city, and philanthropy to make sure you actually create a pipeline that encourages people to say, you can get the training for the job that's out there, the job we need you to fill, the job that could pay you a more livable wage if you're willing to make the jump to get there.
Thank you.
So this leads me into the next question. This is a question from Movimiento Poder. What policies and resources beyond academics do you believe schools and the community need to provide to support students' well-being and achievement, and what would be the city's role? We'll start with you, Kelly.
A few things. I'll start by sharing with you an example of how critical I think the role of government services are to helping our kids both connect in community and also make choices that allow them a future and they can see a future. When I was chief of staff for Mayor Hickenlooper, the chief of police came to me one May and said, we're seeing a serious rise in gang violence in the city, and it's primarily our youth. And often a chief's response is, if we can put more officers on the street, we could address this issue. What we know, I hope you know, is more officers on the street doesn't address issues like that. Instead, we opened our rec centers for free. It was the first time in the city's history we did it, and what we found was a reduction in our kids, both as victims but also committing crime. And it started to make that connection even more powerful about how critical our programs are for after school, for weekends, forming relationship, providing opportunity for community to be built for our kids. We have library programs. We have a number of ways I think that we could partner more closely with our schools to make sure our kids have opportunities to not only be in community, but to also be with adults. The other thing I'll add is I do feel this opportunity for apprenticeships and internships not only exposes kids to careers and gives them a chance to see and experience different kinds of jobs throughout their high school career. The other thing it does is really connects them to adults, meaningful connections that can last through their lifetime and help them network basically to find those opportunities when they're young as well. And I think that's another valuable way the city could partner with our kids and our youth.
Kelly, thank you. Mike?
Well, it's unfortunate I preempted that question because the entire program we built with Movimiento Poder. And so they were the partners that I think designing this same solution they were pushing for, which is they knew how significant the challenges were about kids not having access to after school and summer programming. They knew how unequal they were based on income. And they knew if you do nothing about that, you're never going to close the achievement gaps that exist or the opportunity gaps that exist. And so I think those are very important. I'll add another thing that I think is critical to equity in terms of educational outcomes. We also knew we lived in a state where up to 3 years ago, you could have 25 5-year-olds who came into kindergarten, and they would all have a wonderful day learning until about noon. And at noon, about half of those kids would have to get on the bus and go home. When they asked their teacher, like, why am I not staying for the second half of the day? It was because those kids couldn't pay for a half day of kindergarten. Because we had a city and a state that did not provide full-day kindergarten. In the same way that we had a city and a state that did not provide access to preschool for all kids, but particularly those kids who needed it the most. And so I was very proud of the fact that when I was at Gary Ventures, two of the things we worked on was both the effort to finally, after years and years, deliver full-day kindergarten statewide across Colorado, but more importantly, lead a coalition in 2020 to say that's not enough. We know what we really need is to provide universal preschool. And so was able to bring together a broad coalition to pass a ballot measure in 2020 that created universal preschool for the first time in Colorado. That will roll out this fall. And importantly, will include, yes, 10 hours of universal preschool for everyone in the state, but we'll really focus on providing full days of preschool to those students who we know come from the families with the greatest need. Because what we don't want to do is expand those achievement gaps right as families enter, as kids enter into kindergarten. We know about the million-word gap from what they've had access to previously. We have to compensate for that gap by making sure they get more high-quality opportunities and making sure those kids get to preschool and get to and through, which also allows moms and dads to be able to stay at work for a full day, which is both a workforce opportunity as well as an educational equity opportunity.
All right, thanks. Our next question is from Educate Denver. If students are more scared than ever to attend school, what should be the role of the mayor and the city in making sure our schools are safe? Given the mayor's role in oversight of the police department, what should be the role of Denver Police in working with DPS? Mike?
I'm really glad you asked this one. So I've spent a lot of time talking to students around the city, particularly been on multiple marches with the East High School students. And there are a number of things we have to do. We know in many situations this starts with prevention. It is about how you get young people connected to positive peer groups early before they get at risk of negative peer groups. We also know it's about intervention. It's about once you've identified young people who are at risk because you have someone, for instance, with a previous history of bringing firearms to school, you have to then wrap around all the services that include both therapy and parental support and family support and school interventions. But it also means we need policy change. And I've both had the opportunity to fight these battles and win them successfully, to take on the NRA twice, once to pass universal background checks and also to pass high-capacity magazine bans. But there's more work to do. We know there's more policy change needed, including expanding our red flag measure right now, because as of this year, one of the key people in a young person's life who could not identify someone who is a risk to themselves or others was a teacher. The person most likely to know if a kid's at risk could not file a red flag concern. That needs to change now. But it also does mean that part of what I heard from teachers and parents over and over is they also want to know that their kids feel safe in their own building. And what they asked for me after both the first shooting at East and the second shooting at East was to say, we do want, as part of this protection, to be able to have school resource officers in our building. I said early on in the 9 News debate, I believe that schools should be able to choose if they want those security officers in their building. And when the school board said we refuse to do that, I said if the school board continues to refuse, I would deploy DPD myself directly. So I don't believe that an ideological school board should stand in the way of parents and student safety. After the third shooting, I called for that again, and I was glad when the school board reversed their decision on that. But I think we need to be able to see our job as a school board first and foremost as keeping kids safe, supporting high-quality teaching and high-quality learning, and I think that's the job the mayor has to work with the school board to deliver, and if the school board can't deliver it, the mayor has to do it directly.
Thank you. Kelly?
The most fundamental responsibility of government is to keep you safe. This is one of those issues. Early last fall, I've spent most of my campaign in people's living rooms and coffee shops in your neighborhood. And early on, I was hearing from students and families then that they would like the option to have SROs back in their schools. I think there was a lot of agreement. I think one of the things a mayor could do, and frankly it happened during this campaign, is really making sure our school board is listening to their schools. But I also want to highlight, I think there's a distinction. Depending on where you were in the city, what that looked like looked different for different schools, and I think that's important too. In some schools, they feel like having SROs back in but unarmed, or plain clothes, or to me, I think what the next mayor has to do is help our school board, one, ensure we have a school board that you have the confidence is listening and is responsive, but also make sure we're recognizing community's experience with our officers is vastly different throughout this city. And we're capable in this day and age to be able to deploy our officers in a manner that can meet the needs across that spectrum, and you don't have to have a one-size-fits-all. And the last question that is coming up today on this issue is the question of who pays if the school doesn't have money. I want to be really clear. The safety of our kids is all of our priority. If the city needs to pay to have those school resource officers back in those schools, we pay. And we will figure out later then, how do we reconcile that and what does it look like? But to me, that should be the last concern we have as we're trying to figure out how to keep our kids safe. I do have one more thing. I lied. That was not my last thing. My last thing is this. When our kids have to lead on work that is around keeping them safe, we should all say, shame on us. We have not done enough. Doesn't matter what we've done so far. We have much more work to do, and we have an obligation to do it.
All right, so we want to move on to economic development. Diverse small businesses, and this question is from Small Business Majority. Diverse small businesses are the heart of every community. Yet, we are continually struggling to operate, or businesses are continually struggling to operate in Denver due to high rental costs, due to gentrification, due to developers, and our city's fostering of big business. So how do you plan to prioritize small business support in your administration? Kelly, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I love this question because this was my job at the Chamber of Commerce. 90% of my 3,000 members were small business. We really, that's why we existed, to be honest. And in 2012, we were recognized as best in the nation, our Small Business Development Center, in terms of our ability to support, grow, successful small business in this state. By 2018, though, we really dug into the data, and what we found, women and people of color were not having the same level of success in starting or growing their businesses. And so I think there are some specific things we can do as a city. One is, we know today to be able to be a minority or women-owned enterprise or a DBA, mostly MBE, WBE, we make it pretty hard. You have to fill out a number of applications. You have to do one for CDOT, RTD, City and County of Denver, the state of Colorado. I think we could have one application. When you qualify as an MBE, WBE, you can do business with all of these organizations, and we start to move you through that process to help you be more successful. But I did a second thing at the Chamber that was really successful. We asked our medium and larger companies to look at their supply chains and start to examine diversification. We gave them lists of women and minority-owned businesses that they could start to partner with and engage, hire, contract, and we had huge success. And we started to really expand beyond some of the small goals we have in the city today. I think we could do the same thing in the city, where we expand the goals for using small women-owned, minority-owned businesses, but also really engage our private sector to make a commitment to do the same.
Kelly, thank you. Mike?
I think this is a scenario where the city has really missed the mark. When you think about what our core job is as a city to support small business. So I'll give you an example. Fatima Dickerson, who's the owner, second generation owner of Welton Street Cafe, which is the oldest historically black-owned business in the city and county of Denver. They have been operating for 40 years, very well beloved, hit the same crisis everyone else hit during COVID. We're trying to recover, needed a small bridge grant to be able to get themselves reopened while the whole community was clamoring for them to reopen. Fatima has been waiting 18 months from the city for a $50,000 roughly bridge grant to be able to get the business reopened. What we know, if you are Fatima or any other minority business leader, is you already know if you go to banks, you have a very good chance of being turned away. You already know if you go to outside investors or venture capitalists, you already have a very good chance of getting turned away. The place you ought to be able to go that is willing to bet on you every single time should be your city. Should be the city who says, you know, we're willing to take risk on entrepreneurs because we know there's a chance of failure, but there's a much higher chance of us betting on entrepreneurs who are local, who bring real unique value to our neighborhoods and our communities, and our job ought to begin with early capital and with risk capital that we are happy to take to say we would rather make a bet on a community leader like her to make sure she's going to bring back an iconic neighborhood location like that than to stand by and do nothing. So I think that requires shifting our approach to what our role is, and our role ought to be to cultivate more places that feel uniquely Denver and more neighborhoods that feel uniquely Denver. So you would come someplace and say, oh, let me tell you the place here in town I want to take you that you'll never find anyplace else. And I think we have been too slow and too ineffective to back those entrepreneurs who are already putting so much at stake to try to be successful. We ought to be able to have their backs and have their backs much more quickly.
I had a question about that. Legacy businesses right here, Welton Street Cafe, Coffee at the Point, another one, right? I mean, we're talking about, and I guess I want to know from you guys, how do you define small business real quick?
I would probably do 40 employees or less, something like that, 40 or 50 employees or less.
Okay.
Typically, the federal government defines as 500. Typically in Colorado, we say under 100.
Under 100.
Yeah, and micro is when you get down under 10.
Right, right. Kelly, I don't know if you want to jump in here since Mike has touched on this, but does the city have an obligation to help those legacy businesses in this city that are really struggling? You know, we mentioned 2 in 5 points alone.
Yeah, we're foolish not to. Listen, this is exactly how you build a city. But I'll give you another example of, I think, what was a good program and didn't work and why it didn't work. So downtown today, we have a lot of retail vacancy along the 16th Street Mall. There was a pop-up program structured by the Downtown Denver Partnership, put small business into it, diverse businesses, and it was a wonderful opportunity. Here's why none of them were willing to come in person. They didn't feel safe downtown. Fundamental responsibility. So it's not even just the loans or and frankly, the city's in the business of giving loans. This is about the efficiency of the operation now. The city is committed to this obligation. We just couldn't get it done timely. Downtown, I think we have to be able to also make it safe. So people come, and there is a business there when you get there that we can help grow and be successful.
Our next question is from the Center for Community Wealth Building. What specific steps will you take to shift more of the city's contracts to small, local businesses, particularly those owned by people of color? Mike?
Great. I want to talk about 2 things. I think you were both how we shift those contracts and how we build wealth in those communities where we're potentially looking at development. So I think the first is, yes, we want to be able to make sure that when you are building projects, the city ought to be able to speak with our values. With our values means, yes, we want to make sure we can get a project that's affordable. But we also want to make sure we're going to get a project that's going to pay a livable wage, that's going to support families to be able to have access to benefits, and they're going to support the entrepreneurs that are building our very community to be successful. And so I think you want to prioritize all of those things, including who are the locally owned businesses, who are the minority and women-led businesses, and who do we think are the best first partners for this contract. The second thing I think we want to do is actually change the paradigm for how we think about development right now in the city, which is right now what's happened is in a lot of times you'll go into neighborhoods that have been underdeveloped, and you'll have an investor that will buy up a bunch of land, and what happens is that development gets built, and a small number of people get very wealthy, and a lot of folks who lived there before get pushed out. That is where you see neighborhoods gentrifying over and over. I think there's a different way to approach this. Is how do you think about how we can build wealth collectively in those communities? And so I have an idea called Neighborhood Investment Trust, which is the city could come in and contribute. If we own a piece of land in a neighborhood like Globeville area, Swansea, we can contribute the land to a deal, and we say, okay, we gave you the land, that means we own 30% of this deal. When you build and develop some commercial, some retail, some residential, when that's fully built, we're going to take our 30% ownership, and we're going to distribute that 30% ownership to all of the residents of Globeville who were in that neighborhood before this development came. Which means now, if there's a dividend to pay each year, it's getting paid to the very neighbors who built that neighborhood. If it gets sold 10 years from now at twice the price, the folks that literally build wealth over that development are the folks who built that neighborhood in the first place. That's a possibility where you have a real partnership around allowing neighborhoods to grow in a way that doesn't push out the folks that built them in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Kelly?
I've talked to so many small businesses who will tell you we have real barriers. Bonding requirements, I'll just give you as an example, right? A small business being able to bond at the levels that are required, often significantly even beyond what the project is that they're bidding on, and so it makes no sense. Historic requirements for performance. Well, if you're a brand new company, you don't have the historic requirements for performance. But I think that probably the most egregious thing we do as a city is we pay you very slowly. And when we pay you very slowly, a small business can't hold on long enough to wait for that payment. I actually think there's some pretty simple things we could change in our systems and our structures to really say to our smallest businesses in Denver today, you can do business with us, and we can make it easier and remove the barriers and get you in the ballgame.
Specifically the minority-owned businesses?
Yes, yeah. That is probably the greatest challenge for new companies starting up because they don't have the personal wealth, where I can put my house up, or the other things that sometimes happen with companies.
Okay, we're going to switch to some housing questions. This first one is from the Community Economic Defense Project. You may have heard Denver made a top 10 list recently that no city wants to be on. It's there once again. Redfin says that it's among the cities with the highest net outflow, or people looking to move out of the city. There are a lot of Denverites, renters and homeowners, who are barely holding on to housing. So how do you support them? In other words, how are you thinking about short-term housing stability and keeping families out of homelessness alongside your long-term affordable housing plans and shelter plans? Kelly?
Yeah, prevention is key if we're going to really start to address the challenges we face around homelessness, and a number of cities in the nation are doing a much better job. Here's some of the things that I really think could also work in Denver. Master leasing. This is pretty common, and we really don't engage much in it at all here. The example here would be, as mayor, you might say, I'd like to lease 3,000 units for 3 years. In essence, what you're starting to do is buy down some of the price of that rent. You also lock it in for 3 years. Most importantly, what you do is you get the phone call before someone's evicted, so you can actually help ensure you're keeping them housed, so you're a backstop for them. And this is critical because often it's small amounts of money that are resulting in someone losing their housing today, and it's much less expensive than what we're doing today of trying to take people out of homelessness. I'm going to share another example with you, though, that rehouses people really successfully in Charlotte, North Carolina. They started to engage the private sector in rehousing people. These are folks who've been unhoused. About 40% of the people unhoused in our region today are estimated to have jobs. And what they did in Charlotte is the private sector created a foundation. That nonprofit will underwrite the risk of rehousing me. So they'll pay the deposit. They'll pay the rent if I can't pay the rent. And if I have to be evicted, they'll pay to have me evicted. Here's what they found. They rehoused 90% of the people they rehoused using this program, signed a second year's lease, and cost less than $1,000 per person per year. I think those kind of programs where we're underwriting the risk so somebody else gets the call when something goes wrong in your life instead of being evicted, unhoused, and then trying to come out of homelessness, I think would be much more effective.
Thank you. Mike?
Here's the reason why this is incredibly urgent tonight, which is if you think about this city tonight, 80% of the teachers, nurses, firefighters, social workers, servers at your local restaurant, 80% of those folks right now cannot afford to live in Denver tonight. That is the truth about where we are. They're paying 40, 50% of what they make for rent, which means you can't possibly pay the rest of the bills in your stack if you're doing that. I was talking to a woman at a coffee shop who's the manager. She's been there 10 years, worked her way up to the manager. She's got a daughter. She's raising on her own. And she spends every month worrying that if the rent goes up at the end of this month, they're not going to have a place to live anymore. We can't afford to have a city where the folks that serve this city can't afford to live. And so what we have to do is we have to make sure that we can actually build units that will stay permanently affordable. This was why I spent the last 2 years on Proposition 123. I'm building a statewide coalition for the first time in history to take on affordable housing at scale and to put $300 million a year into affordable housing. But what that will do in Denver directly is it will mean I would, as mayor, build 25,000 permanently affordable units over the next 8 years. That means if you are making $40,000 a year, you can live in one of these units as a first-year teacher, and you are guaranteed that your rent never goes up over $1,000 a month if you make $40,000 a year. Your rent doesn't go up unless your income goes up, which means you don't have to worry each month that you're going to be pushed out. And more importantly, that unit is deed restricted to stay affordable forever. So you don't have to worry if some new landlord comes and buys the building, that they can say, oh, sorry, new owner in town, we're jacking up the rent $300 a month. That kind of protection gives you the long-term stability to say, okay, this is now a city where I know I want to take a job as a first-year teacher, and I can start building a family here, building a life here without being worried that every month I might have the risk that I can't live here anymore.
Thank you.
I think Mike has a crystal ball because I'm going to talk about Proposition 123. It provides interventions for a spectrum of income earners. So, Kelly, I'll start with you. What policy and funding recommendations would you pursue that will create new and preserve existing housing explicitly for extremely low and very low income individuals? And we're talking about $24,000 to $40,000 a year.
So first I have to start by talking about Proposition 123. And I feel like I have to tell you the truth about Proposition 123. Two things you should know. While, yes, we passed it at the state of Colorado, the first thing you should know is Denver doesn't qualify for a single dollar of that money today. It requires that permitting in Denver be done in less than 90 days. And today it's about 18 months that Denver takes to go through that process. But the second thing you should know, and we've all been in meetings where it's been very clearly communicated to us, the forecast is that fund will have $0 in 2 years because it is based on excess revenue being taken in by our state under the Tabor limits. We reduced our income tax. We know in 2 years it's highly unlikely that fund will have funding for us. And I think it is important to acknowledge that, either that or we're taking it out of education, which I wouldn't advocate for. Instead, I think this is where we have to do the hard work ahead of really looking at how do we ensure we have more affordable units. The challenge for the extremely affordable, we do have federal dollars that we can continue to use to help us, but I think we have to have more public housing. We know that DHA is growing that housing today. I think in partnership with some of the ideas I've shared already, like master leasing, even beyond the city doing it, but employers looking at doing it, so they provide a backstop for employees not to lose their housing. I think those strategies are much more meaningful. And of course, the city getting more efficient so that we actually build more of the housing we need that's affordable. And listen, our permitting process not only prevents us from getting the 123 money, it is costing all of us millions of dollars every year because we're so inefficient in helping the private sector build the housing we desperately need. So I would improve the efficiency on permitting.
Kelly, thank you.
Great. Well, the good news is you have the chance to have a mayor who's going to fix that permitting process. And so that is the way you solve this. Two things. I'm glad that we're in for policy debate because I think facts matter. The reality is two things. One is that we do know that we can deliver a 90-day permitting process for affordable units. These are focused on units that we know are affordable. It doesn't apply to every unit in the market right now. And we know there are other cities like Colorado Springs doing this right now. I've been working with the city and planning and zoning department. They're working on an accelerated process to get there. They're already close. But yes, it will require a new leader with real courage to say our major priority in Denver is to deliver a process that actually solves the problem we have, which is there are not enough affordable housing stock right now in the city. I will make sure I lead and run a department that does that. Also very important, and I know because we wrote the measure, that actually there's more than $1.5 billion of surplus in that account, and there will continue to be there, and that will grow over time as structurally we know income is going to grow faster right now over the coming years. And so that means there will be $300 million a year, and they come out every year immediately unless the legislature were to pass a bill to stop that funding. I don't think legislators are going to vote against the idea of affordable housing. If they try to, I will be up there to advocate that the voters gave them a very clear message. That's where the dollars want to be spent. So I think these are, but this is where it's important to be able to actually have a plan for, my dad used to say, you know, anyone can knock down a barn, it takes a carpenter to build one. The question is, what is the proactive proposal for how you do this? You have to have a clear plan for how you can build these 25,000 units, and this is a strategy that both provides financing and provides scalability and provides consistency, because what we didn't have before was either consistent public funding, we didn't have regulatory reform that made those projects go fast enough, and we didn't have accountability to show that you actually permit and build those number of affordable units every year. Prop 123 does that if you have a mayor with the courage to deliver on it, which was one of the reasons why I got into this race in the first time.
Kelly, I want to know, Michelle started out by saying we really want to identify some of maybe the nuanced differences in your positions, and I sit there and watch you listen to what he said. Do you agree?
I want to agree, right? But other people do the projections at the state in terms of what you can expect given that we lowered our income tax and it's expected to have $0 going into that fund. And so I wouldn't bank on it, no. I think this is really important. The other thing is I don't think Denver in 40 years has had a permitting process that's been less than 90 days. I too believe we can get there, but I think I have the plan that will get us there. And I think it's going to be a two-step process, and I frankly think it requires a serious restructure of how the city operates. Today, our permitting process has a number of silos and cabinet members. So I want you to think about, you have a forestry department, which is Parks and Rec, you have a building code, a planning department, a fire department, all with DOTI, Department of Transportation, all with different cabinet members. And I think what you don't have is this kind of accountability of customer service. The planning has been done, the zoning has been done, now it's about building and delivering for a customer who needs that product. I'd restructure the whole thing, put it in one department, one manager with accountability so we could deliver on it. And we should still do it. Listen, I'm going to do it. I just think the piece we have to accept is I don't think the state is going to be able to save us to build the kind of housing we need, and I think we're going to have to do it ourselves and still do the work.
So I want to hit on one last housing question, because this one I think is an important one. Displacement is a huge issue in Denver right now. The Washington Post recently highlighted the North Side, Glowville, Elyria, Swansea, and Five Points neighborhoods, and the gentrification and subsequent displacement of community members, families, and small businesses. One of the neighbors in that article said, you know, I can stay in place, but I feel out of place in my neighborhood anymore. As mayor, what policies and programs would you enact to prevent more displacement from occurring in Denver? Mike?
My first? So the first one is making sure we get access to the affordable units we just described, which is being able to, I mean, there are two ways that we can make Denver more affordable. One is we make sure that we reduce people's costs. The other is we make sure that we support better wages. Right? Those are the two variables you can influence. And so I think the key is, yes, making sure that we get access to 25,000 affordable units that we would build to make sure people can live in a place that they're not going to get pushed out of. But the other part is really home ownership. We know that families want to be able to stay long-term in the neighborhoods that they've built or that they've grown up in, and that renting is not a path to do that long-term. So we want to move people towards home ownership. And I've done two things already on this. One is we built a program called the Deerfield Fund, which was focused specifically on Black and African American families who were getting displaced from their neighborhoods and being able to actually get access to buying homes. What we knew was the biggest obstacle was down payment assistance. You could not, if you had the income and you had the credit, but you didn't have a down payment, you wouldn't be able to actually get into that home and stay in that home. By providing up to $50,000 of down payment assistance, families can get into that home. They can stay there as long as they want. Whenever they refinance the home or sell it, they can pay the money forward to the next family. And so we've done that already as a very successful innovation in the city. I would expand that citywide to provide that kind of down payment assistance to families across the city who are either first-time home buyers or first-generation home buyers. I think the other thing we have to do to help in terms of allowing people to stay in their neighborhoods is make sure that they have livable wages. And this is a place where Kelly and I disagree. You know, I've been a strong and active supporter of increasing the minimum wage. I think Kelly has opposed that 3 or 4 times. And so I think this is one where if you do want to make this city livable, it means you got to make sure it's affordable for people to live here and it's affordable for people to work here. That means both making sure they have a livable wage. It means making sure they have livable rental houses, make sure they have livable home ownership options. I think we got to do all of those at the same time.
So the Deerfield Fund, just real quick, that's a loan essentially that you pay back in the equity when you sell the house, right?
Correct.
How many families has it helped?
About 150 so far.
Okay.
We started with. We built about a $12 million fund philanthropically. The idea is we can now expand that with both public dollars and others. Prop 123 also puts dollars in for home ownership that would allow you to scale these kind of programs around the state. And so I think that's a very important next step.
Okay. Kelly?
I support minimum wage. But let's do this answer. 2 things on displacement and wealth building. I'll try to hit on both. So first around displacement. We know today more and more elderly people we're seeing come into our, losing their housing and becoming unhoused in our region. These are people in our community who would like to age in place, but probably need to find a way that they can increase revenue off the current property just to pay their property taxes. There's no question our approval as a city of accessory dwelling units to be in your backyard can really help, but I don't think it's enough to give the opportunity. I think we could take a few extra steps that actually help homeowners be able to realize that opportunity. I think this might be everything from the city doing design based on the neighborhood, maybe even precision build, which can be less expensive and better built to bring in as that ADU, so families can actually take advantage of the opportunity, maybe even low interest loans so they can get it up and running. And it allows people to age in place. Maybe their kids take over the house or vice versa. I also think we have to consider that it not be limited to only family members. I think the argument, right, this is about making sure that we're providing affordability, and if it's limited to only family, you actually can't rent that then to a non-family member, and I would start to explore with City Council how we could change that zoning limitation. A second issue, though, is home ownership, as we were discussing. We know Denver's becoming whiter and wealthier. And so you could see why people say, I don't even feel like I belong here anymore. I think we have to, neighborhood by neighborhood, start to look at all the places, and I'm particularly interested in publicly owned surface parking lots because it's publicly owned land and it's like land banking. I got the chance to tour this in Munich, where it's almost like you're building on top of the surface lot. You can still park there. 100 affordable units for families, for sale product that now you can live in a neighborhood you never could have afforded. Your kids can go to a school they never could have accessed. And we start to recreate the Denver that we value, where we're all living together in community, building social capital.
You touched on how these neighborhoods are changing, so I do want to ask a follow-up question on that. I grew up in North Denver. I grew up 2 blocks away from my grandparents one way, 2 blocks away from my cousins another way, and several friends. I don't think anybody I grew up with really is in North Denver anymore. So the neighborhoods have changed over time. It's been a long time since I was young, but, but the neighborhoods have changed so much. The Washington Post does have a study from 2010 to 2020. They saw a white population increase. Kelly, you talked about this, in urban areas. In Denver alone, the white population growth has outpaced the rate of Latino growth 6-fold. That was from 2019. How do you address that? And how do you keep Latinos in an area that they were in for so long, for generations? Kelly, we'll start with you.
I think you have to be really intentional, right? This is where in Colorado, 73% of white families own their home, 41% of black families own their home. We know we have created serious historical barriers and inequities that have resulted in what we have today. I think we have to be intentional about saying we're going to change those to address those inequities. So when we build a for sale product that we're ensuring is affordable, that families can begin to build wealth again, we need to make sure we're focused on whether it's by zip code or by race, but where we see the inequity and we start to correct for it. I think it's fundamental and critically important. And we have some neighborhoods where we still have an opportunity, frankly, to save from gentrification. I'd say on the west side, we know we have neighborhoods there where I raised my girls, where I think there is the opportunity to be able to say, let's take the steps today, right now, that we don't end up increasing the white population and reducing our Latina population.
Kelly, thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I think this is the challenge we're seeing all around the city right now, and it goes to a couple of key components we've talked about. One is about affordability, the ability to be able to continue to rent in your own neighborhood if you live there. Another one is about ownership, being able to pass on home ownership to your kids. That's why I think the ability to both make sure families can buy in those neighborhoods. And also it's about how we ease the process for families to make changes in their own homes, like alternative dwelling units. I'll talk to a lot of families on the west side who will say, you know what, we want to build an alternative dwelling unit in our backyard because that's our chance for our kid to be able to make sure she can still live in the neighborhood until she can make it to be affordable. And a lot of these places, this is where the city's slow permitting process is in the way of keeping those families together. I talked to someone on the west side who wanted to build an alternative dwelling unit to care for her mother who was aging, and they wanted to be able to have her close. They waited 2.5 years to get the permit approved, and her mother passed before they ever get the ADU even permitted, which means you not only see families that are being moved out of the neighborhood, you see families who aren't even being able to care for the folks that they love in that very same neighborhood. So this is where, yes, we have to have aggressive policies on more affordable rentals. We have to be able to expand what we did on Deerfield to make sure families who've grown up in these neighborhoods can stay there and own homes. And we have to make sure that the city sees ourselves as partners to be able to much more quickly support families in the kind of accommodations or modifications they want to make to their own homes so they can keep their moms or their daughters in the neighborhoods they grew up in.
That is so
Thank you.
sad. 2.5 years. We have some questions from CU Denver students that we're going to go to now. Our first question is from Savannah Brooks.
Hi, my name is Savannah Brooks. I'm the Vice President-elect of the CU Denver Student Government Association. The RTD transportation system is essential for many of our area campus constituents, and recently RTD has seen an increase in break-ins, drug use, and failing infrastructure. So my question to both of you is, how will you work to support and enhance the RTD transportation system to create a more reliable system for our CU Denver constituents?
Mike, you want to start with that one?
Thank you so much for your question, and congrats on your leadership. Look forward to voting for you in the future. A couple of things. Yes, one is we are in kind of a doom loop right now with public transit, which is a lot of folks aren't riding it because, as you said, they find it to be unreliable or not convenient or not always safe. And so the fewer the folks that ride it, and the fewer routes we have, the less convenient it is, the less predictable it is, and so on and so forth. And so I think we have to reverse that loop by saying, let's get more riders onto public transit. Let's be able to make it safer by making sure we have security to make it more attractive. And let's make sure there are convenient and regular routes, because the more people you get on it, the more routes we can add. And so this is why I think we have to stimulate more use of public transit. The state, you saw, did an August free public transit move, which was to try to encourage people to try it again or try it for the first time. And that was very successful. We don't have the resources to make it free to everyone right now, but I think where we start is with young people and students and commuters. People have the most obligation to get to and from downtown, to make it cheaper for you, to make it easier to access. And the more of folks that we can get riding it like you, the more we can get more predictable routes, and the more we make it attractive for other business leaders and for other workers to be able to use it. So I think this is going to be critical. As you know, public transit is both a cost saver for people, it's both a climate saver for people because it avoids us putting more and more cars on the road, and it's much safer. It avoids the risks of traffic deaths that we talked about for pedestrians and bikers and others. And so, and it also gets more vibrance back to downtown. So we want to make it as easy as possible for more and more people to come back to downtown, particularly those students who are going to be leading the city over the next 20 years. So thanks for your question.
Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, the answer isn't too different, but I would add a few things. I think I think about, so when I'm not commuting on my bike, when it's snowy on the ground, or I typically take transit. And like you, I think there is a hesitancy today. I literally took it a couple weeks ago, and it was late at night. Not really late. I can't stay up that late. Not as late as you can stay up. But it was probably 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and I jumped on the train to go home. I'm not supposed to, some of my team is here and they're going to be mad at me for doing this. And I was like, oh, I feel perfectly comfortable, until I didn't, right? I was the only one in the car, and then some other folks got on, and I was like, I'm not as comfortable today. And it really resonates for me that when more people are on, you feel safer and more comfortable. I think one of the challenges is we definitely have to make sure, you know, for people who are unhoused and have nowhere to go, that we actually change our shelter system and and we get people to permanent housing where they do have some place to be. So they're not trying to find shelter in spaces that might make someone more uncomfortable. I know that will help. Our transit police are different than our Denver police, and I think there could be a closer partnership in working together to make sure that you're feeling safe and getting the support you need when you are riding. But I also think this is a huge land use issue. We have to build more around those transit stops. This is where our affordable housing should be going. It not only makes your life easier, it saves money, it reduces water, it improves air quality. That's really, as we think about our future, where we should have our density and our development. And then the last thing I want to throw in here, because I have 20 seconds, is this issue of how you pay for it. Because it is a barrier. Students, every semester you're thinking about, will I get it again for this year? Will the school pay for it, or won't they pay for it? Our employees are the same. I think we have to come up a new way that we pay for transit as residents here, so that it removes that barrier of paying.
Kelly, thank you. Our next question is from CU Denver student Bria Combs.
Hi, I'm Priya Combs, and I am CU Denver's SGA President-elect. So as Chancellor Marks mentioned earlier, we serve about 40,000 students annually from the 3 different institutions. And so my question for you guys today, how do you both think about working, and how do you anticipate working with CU Denver and our other Auraria campus constituents to enhance student learning, student development opportunities, and also community partnerships?
I love this question, and wow, thank you for your service. You may have a bigger job than we're going for. This is so key, both for student learning, but frankly also for learning with employers, you know, folks in the workforce today. The benefit of working together. So I'll share with you a big reason I love paid apprenticeships and paid internships is it brings in young people. When my daughters were teenagers, they were perfectly willing to tell me how stupid I was every single day. And sometimes they were right. And it's so healthy to have people coming in challenging the way we do things because we get so used to doing them. But you also challenge us in ways around technology where you may find it more natural and easy to think about how to use technology differently. I think being able to connect you to current workplaces for your learning, but for our learning. And then the last thing, and I think this may be the most important one, is we have real cultural barriers that are existing throughout every institution we have in this nation. We need our young people coming in early and often, helping us look at how to break those barriers down, because you will see them faster than we're seeing them. And I would say it's fundamental and critical. So I also think every single employer has to recognize no more unpaid internships. Like, that has got to go. We know that is for limited people who have privilege and access and money. And for many of us, we have to be paid. And I would say those are the things maybe we could shift our thinking as a society that says we pay you to learn with us because you also help advance our work.
Kelly, thank you. Mike?
Congratulations, Madam President. Great to meet you. Thanks for being here. I am delighted also. I serve on the Board of Trustees at Metro State, so I'm one of the partners to help try to govern your campus, and I'm so excited about so many things. I think we have missed a real opportunity for Denver to be a much better partner with this campus. I mean, you are the crown jewel in the middle of downtown Denver, and we ought to be able to make that the academic center of the city. So for me, that means a couple things. One is I think we should add a lot more housing on that campus so more and more students can actually live on that campus, not just because it's good for you, it's good for us. Actually, we want you to be hanging out and at dinner or talking to people or hosting events in the evening time to activate that campus. We want to be able to bring more commercial and more retail onto that campus. You got places to eat and places to hang out and places to shop. And I think the other benefit is that helps connect the city back to you. We want to be able to have you hosting the kind of thought leadership and the guest speakers and the seminars that draw the mayor and the city council leaders and the business leaders and the legislators over to come to you to listen to what ideas that you're thinking about. I think that's the really huge opportunity. And then, as you all know, we're very proud of the fact that campus educates more Coloradans, and particularly more Coloradans of color, than any other campus in the state. And so when you think about what our real workforce is to provide the high quality, diverse talent this city so badly needs, we are literally sitting on that magnet. And so I think part of what that connection does is build the stronger relationships between you and the business leaders who want to hire you, and the mayors who want to hire you, and the city council people who want to hire you, and the businesses who are spending a lot of time searching for talent outside of the city, and they only got to walk 20 feet across the street to find you. But I think the more we can do to build that relationship between the city and the campus, I think would be really exciting. So looking forward to having you as an advisor.
Thank you. Our next question is from CU Denver student Shaun Burns.
Hello. It's really nice to be able to speak before you guys today. I'm a CU Denver student, and I'm also a student under Dean Teskey in the School of Public Affairs. The past several years have created a landscape of increased political engagement and political integration across the United States from young voters. My generation, understandably so, has also become more apathetic towards government due to the rise and fall of so many attempts at meaningful change in de jure and de facto legal and political environments. Frankly, why should Aurora students vote for you, and what meaningful change can you bring in policy and law to satisfy your young constituency?
Mike?
Great question. I think this is a moment where people are looking, and young people are looking particularly for courageous leaders who are willing to take on really hard problems and willing to put themselves out on things that are difficult. And I think for me that would be because I have a track record of having done that a bunch of times. You know, whether it was when I first had students who wanted to go to your campus and couldn't get there because they were undocumented, and I ran for the Senate the first time to try to make that a reality and got to be on your campus when that bill was signed and 1,000 students lost their mind, and it was fantastic. Whether it was on gun safety, when after we had the theater at the Aurora shooting and people said, oh, nothing to be done, we're just stuck with this scenario. We said we refuse to believe that. Actually, there are things we can do, and we banned high-capacity magazines. We required universal background checks even at gun shows and online. Or whether it was on something like how do we close the wealth gap, which seems like too big and impossible of a topic to handle until you can start to drill down to what are the biggest drivers of the wealth gap, and they really are access to home ownership. And the gaps really are access to down payment to get to home ownership, which is why we built Deerfield. Or on things like universal preschool, which for 100 years it seemed impossible to get to until we found a way to make it possible. I think that is true now, whether it's big ideas on climate, whether it's big ideas on homelessness, whether it's big ideas on affordable housing, or big ideas on workforce training for the people who want to enter the workforce. I think I've tried to always lead by listening to the folks who are closest to the problem and then be able to swing big at the problems we know make the biggest difference. And I think what we're going to need now is a mayor who's willing to build really broad coalitions and then be able to deliver really historic results on these big problems. And I would be honored to have you as a partner in trying to do that.
Thank you. Kelly?
The question makes me a little sad, right? Because you just got to reflect on that the next generation is dismayed with what they see in our nation and particularly around politics. At the same time, I have to say, having been an employee at MSU Denver, it has the honor and distinction of being one of the most engaged institutions in the United States of America when it comes to voting. And so I'm not giving up either. I think there's good reason. And I don't think it's just our young people who feel some of the dismay that you've described, right? I think we're all sick and tired of the fighting and blaming. The never shall two sides ever meet or come together and find a solution that could actually be implemented. That we spend our time convincing each other of what's wrong with each other instead of what's possible. And then we tell you what we're going to do to solve your problems instead of inviting you to help build that future and shape what we should be doing. For me, those are probably lessons I've learned in my life. Probably some of them probably the hard way. What I would say to you as mayor that I think would be appealing, no matter your age, would be how I approach leadership and the work. That I actually bring people together who not only disagree, but actually dislike each other. Because I think that's my job. That to solve issues or address real challenges, it requires that we're willing to admit when we're wrong too. And I have, and I will again. It also requires, though, that I give you real voice and the real chance to tell me what you think we should be doing. And I will do that as well. Because here's what I really believe. We cannot make progress on these issues if we don't give voice to the people struggling with them the most today. And I would need your help. I would not tell you how I'd address the issue, but I'd invite you to help me do the work.
Kelly, thank you. And thank you to the students for
Yeah,
all of the
wonderful questions.
Great.
Well done.
So we do have a closing question, and I think this is interesting. Please share the one idea your opponent has that you would implement or build on. It's a tough one.
Yes.
It's a good one.
We actually have two. We're going to ask you to answer this question, 1 minute answer.
Yes.
And then I have one last follow-up to that. I'm sorry.
Great. I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of great ideas on this campaign. That was the beauty of 17 candidates, is there are a lot of people with great ideas. And one of Kelly's that I particularly liked is, I think one of the challenges to your question is how do we make the RTD a better functioning system? And I think one of the challenges people have right now is most people don't know their RTD board members, not sure if they elected for them. Many times no one runs and there's a vacancy and you have to write someone in. And so I think it's not always the most functional board. I think one of the things that Kelly proposed was the idea of, do we potentially have either a mayoral appointees on those boards? Do you have a partnership of mayors from around the region that would together either add members to that board or would together potentially help lead the governance of that board? I think some way to keep that board more directly accountable to the city governments that are directly served by them, I thought was a great idea.
Thanks, Mike.
Kelly?
I think what really resonates for me that Mike talks about is, and this probably comes from my own childhood, but being able to, as a kid, participate in activities after school and not feel like, it's money that keeps you from doing it. I think it's critically important that our public schools are a huge success, that we provide significant support, and we ensure our kids in those schools get the opportunity to play sports, be involved in activities, build relationship outside of school, and that really resonates for me, and I'd keep trying to figure out how we do that.
Very nice. Now I'm going to ask you, which specific plan or approach proposed by your opponent do you disagree with most? So this is one that you disagree with most.
This is tough, though, because, listen, I want it to be true. I want Prop 123 to have the money so we can get the job done. I think for me, what I disagree, I respect the forecasters at the state who said it may not be there, and so I think that's just hard for me to say it will.
Mike, what do you disagree with Kelly on?
Yeah, I think probably the most salient one for me is around homelessness and our approach to homelessness. I think my feeling has been you got to really focus on providing people access to housing first and to wraparound services that go there. I don't think the solution is to arrest people who are homeless, which I think has been part of Kelly's proposal. And so I think that's probably the biggest difference is on that one. I feel like the more and more people I talk to who are struggling to find their way to make it, what I think they really need is access to housing and to services, and that would be, for me, the biggest area of focus. That would be a difference.
And we are talking about, since I did a different forum, arresting those who refuse to leave, right? Who say, I don't want to go to a shelter, I don't want to go to...
save someone's life, yeah, instead of leaving them to fend for themselves.
All right, it is time now for closing remarks. And you each have a minute, and Kelly, you're up first.
Well, first I would say thank you both for a great forum, and thank you for your wonderful questions, and thank all of you for joining us. You know, through this entire campaign, I have shared my family's story, not because I think I'm a victim, not because I need sympathy. I actually think my family's really strong. I share it because I actually think it's the story of so many in Denver today. I lost my father to violent crime, and so for me, you know, when I look at crime today, my team is focused on preventing crime and supporting victims and their families. My family received government assistance, and I know the shame people feel when you get assistance from government, but the truth is every single one of us have received assistance from someone in our lives. I'd be proud to be a mayor who held people long enough to find their path forward. And my husband struggled with addiction our entire life together, and my girls and I lost him to suicide. And I know it's community that helps family get through those issues. And I'm committed to be the mayor who rebuilds our community so together we can get through the challenges we face, but also restore the promise of Denver that allows your family to thrive here, allows you and your kids to see a future in our city again. And it would be my honor, and I would love to have your support to be able to do that work.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you so much for having us. When I first became a principal, I had a mentor, and she used to say to me, Michael, there are only two things you can offer to children. She would say, truth and hope. And I feel like the same is true as we look at Denver in this moment, which is there are hard truths to face about where Denver is, and there's real hope in what's possible. The truths are, yes, we know that at one of our flagship high schools this year, we've not had just one or two, but 3 shootings on that campus. That's a hard truth. We know 80% of the teachers and nurses and firefighters can't afford to live in the city tonight. That's a truth. We know that tonight when we go home, 1,400 people who are homeless will be walking around downtown Denver looking for a sidewalk or a park to sleep in. That is a hard truth. But the hope is much bigger than that, which is we know that these problems are not unsolvable. It is actually not only possible, but should be expected that we can solve these problems. And what I want back is a city where 3 years from now you can, at any time of night, take your kids down to the 16th Street Mall and sit on a patio and have a drink, and your kids can run around and play, and you don't have to worry once about their safety. Or you can drop your kid off to the kindergarten and your teacher swoops her up in her arms, and you know that kindergarten teacher can still afford to live in this city. And you know when you go home at night, you can walk through all of downtown Denver and not have to see anybody that has to sleep on the streets. That, I think, is what's possible for Denver, and that's what I hope for us to deliver together in this next election. And I would love to have your help. Thanks so much for having us.
And I want to thank the 2 candidates for participating in this event, for your remarks, and for answering the questions. And I do want to remind everyone out there, get out and vote on June 6th. And now I want to send it back over to Paul Teske, the Dean of the School of Public Affairs at the University of Colorado, Denver.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was just fantastic. Thank you all. You know, like most of you in the audience, I feel very lucky to live in Denver. We have all the challenges that were discussed and that all big cities have, but I think we have the collaboration, the willpower, the energy to actually solve these problems, and we have the people. I love that we make it easy to vote here by mail. We had public financing. We had 16 fascinating candidates. We're down to 2. I know them both well. They're fantastic. people. We'll be very lucky to have either one as mayor, and I think when we do make that selection in a few weeks, we'll also have a second candidate who I know will continue to do great work in our city and our community, and I appreciate that so much. Thank you, Shaun and Michelle, for great questions. Thanks to our students for their questions. Thanks to our partners at the Denver Foundation who did a great job. Everybody else who helped with putting this event together, including the folks at CBS Colorado. We do have in the back, if you can stay for a few minutes, Dave from Scratch Catering, who's a small business owner, has some cookies for us, also some drinks. So please stay and have these conversations about the future of our city. I'm not sure if our candidates can stay very long, but I know how busy they are these days. But again, thank you all for coming, and thanks for a great event.